I pulled into the staff parking lot behind St. Augustine's Memorial Hospital just before midnight. The asphalt slicked from a light rain that made the yellow security lights smear into long, blurred streaks across my windshield. And for a few seconds, I just sat there in the silence. Engine idling, hands tight on the steering wheel, trying to convince myself this job was just like any other night shift. Nothing special, nothing wrong, just bodies and paperwork. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Not tonight. Not after. What happened last week when one of the attendants swore they saw a drawer open by itself in the cold room and quit on the spot without even grabbing their paycheck? And I told myself they were just spooked, probably heard a noise or imagined something in the dark. But the rumor had been gnawing at me for days. And now, as the digital clock on my dashboard clicked over to 12:01 a.m., I couldn't shake the heavy feeling pressing against my chest. Like walking into a movie where you already know something bad is about to happen, but you don't know when. I grabbed my ID badge and swung open the door, the wet night air biting cold against my neck, the distant hum of the city drowned out by the low mechanical rumble of the hospital generators kicking on somewhere deep inside. And the whole place looked wrong somehow. Too quiet, like even the wind had decided it didn't want to cross this part of town after midnight. And for a second I almost turned back, almost threw the car into reverse and drove home without calling anyone. But then my phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Miles, the supervising pathologist on call tonight. "We've got 2 new arrivals. Be here ASAP. No excuses. No backing out." I slung my bag over my shoulder and walked across the cracked pavement toward the side entrance, my boots squeaking faintly on the damp concrete as the motion-activated lights blinked on one by one, throwing long, sharp shadows that seemed to stretch ahead of me like they were leading me somewhere I didn't want to go. The security door clicked as I swiped my card and I stepped into the basement corridor. The familiar rush of cold air hitting me immediately, smelling faintly of antiseptic and steel. But tonight it felt heavier, damp somehow, like the air itself had weight, and I couldn't tell if it was the AC struggling again or if it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. My footsteps echoed against the tile as I passed the darkened storage rooms, my reflection rippling faintly in the polished glass windows. And somewhere far down the hall I thought I heard the hollow clang of metal, sharp and distinct, like a drawer being slammed shut, but when I stopped to listen the sound was gone, swallowed by the hum of the ventilation fans, and I told myself it was nothing, just the old ducks settling like they always did. But my throat was already dry, heartbeat climbing as I reached the morgue entrance at the far end of the corridor, the heavy steel door marked authorized personnel only, looming like a vault door between me and whatever waited on the other side. I paused with my hand on the handle, trying to steady my breathing, and told myself it was going to be fine. It's just another night shift, another checklist, another stack of forms. But when I finally pushed the door open, the rush of cold hit me like stepping into a freezer, sharp enough to sting my teeth, and the lights inside buzzed faintly overhead, casting everything in a washed-out blue-white glare that made the rows of stainless steel drawers look endless, like some kind of industrial beehive for the dead. The air smelled different than usual, though, thicker somehow, metallic, and it took me a second to realize what it reminded me of. Pennies. That faint, sharp tang of copper I'd learned to associate with blood, fresh enough that my stomach clenched without warning. I crossed to the central workstation where Dr. Miles was hunched over a clipboard, his gaunt face lined by the glare of the fluorescents, and he didn't even look up when he said, "Took you long enough." I muttered an apology, setting my bag down, trying to shake off the unease crawling up the back of my neck, but my eyes kept drifting past him toward the far wall, where a single drawer halfway down the third row was slightly ajar, no more than an inch, just enough to catch the light and throw a sliver of reflection across the floor. And I told myself it was fine, that it probably didn't latch earlier. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt, like it wasn't open because someone forgot. It was open because something inside had pushed. Dr. Miles barely looked up from his clipboard when I started unpacking my things, his thin-framed glasses perched on the tip of his nose as his pen scratched across the forms in quick, sharp strokes. And for a moment, the only sounds in the room were the low hum of the refrigeration units and the faint buzzing of the overhead lights. But my eyes kept drifting back to that single drawer on the far wall, The one cracked open just enough to catch the light, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't supposed to be like that. That whoever had last checked the logs would have noticed if it hadn't sealed properly. And maybe I should have said something right then, but I told myself not to be ridiculous, that this was my first solo night shift without supervision, and the last thing I wanted was to give Miles more ammo to call me rookie. So I swallowed. It enforced my hands to keep moving, unrolling a pair of fresh nitrile gloves and snapping them on. The sound sharp in the cold air. Miles finally glanced up, his pale face framed by the sterile glow, and muttered, "2 new arrivals, motor vehicle accident, tagged and bagged in cold storage, top row," before jerking his chin toward the logs, and I nodded, crossing to the workstation where the clipboard hung, flipping through the forms until I found tonight's entries. The neat handwriting detailing times, names, causes of death, except there was something off about the bottom line. A hastily scrawled note squeezed. Between margins, drawer 14 secured 2143, do not open until further notice. My chest tightened as I scanned the room, my gaze landing instinctively on the 3rd row where drawer 14 should have been. And sure enough, the cracked open one was in the exact spot. I opened my mouth to ask Miles about it, but stopped when I saw the deep crease between his brows. His pen paused mid-scratch, his eyes narrowing faintly like he was listening to something beyond us. And then it came. The faintest metallic creak, soft but sharp enough to slice through the humming silence, and both of us turned our heads at the same time toward the far wall, just as the drawer slid another inch outward, smooth and deliberate, the glint of stainless steel catching under the fluorescent light like a blade. I froze, every muscle locking, the clipboard slipping slightly in my hands, and Miles muttered something under his breath I couldn't catch before stepping forward, his shoes scuffing softly against the tile, his shoulders tight beneath his lab coat as he reached for the drawer handle with deliberate slowness, and I wanted to stop him, wanted to say something, but my voice caught in my throat, the cold suddenly biting harder against my skin. He touched the edge, fingers curling over the steel, and pulled. The drawer resisted at first, like something heavy was pressing against it from the inside, then released suddenly, sliding out on its rails with a soft groan that made my teeth clench, revealing the sealed black body bag beneath. For a moment, neither of us moved, our breath frosting faintly in the chill, and then Miles exhaled sharply, muttering, "Vacuum seal must have caught." His tone clipped and forced, like he didn't quite believe his own explanation. I wanted to believe him too. Wanted to convince myself this was mechanical, nothing more. But even from where I stood, I could see the zip tie on the bag's tab had been snapped clean through. The edges frayed like it had been pulled from the inside, and I took an involuntary step back, heart hammering loud enough I could hear it in my ears. Miles caught my hesitation and said flatly, "Don't start." His voice a low warning, but even as he pushed the drawer back in and forced the latch closed, the sound echoed through the cold room like metal grinding against bone, and I swear, I heard something else underneath it, faint but clear, like a single shallow breath escaping from behind the zipper, and when the latch finally clicked, sealing drawer 14 again, the silence that followed felt heavier than before, like the whole morgue was holding its breath with us. Miles went back to scribbling on his clipboard like nothing had happened, but I couldn't focus on anything except the faint sound my brain refused to let go of, that soft hiss, that impossible breath escaping the sealed bag, and the silence afterward pressed down on my chest like weight, thick and oppressive, as though the walls themselves were leaning in closer, and the hum of the refrigeration units that had been constant all night suddenly seemed distant, muffled, like I was hearing it through water. I swallowed hard, trying to push the lump in my throat down, forcing myself to busy my hands by sorting instruments on the steel tray. But the air felt colder now, sharper, every inhale stinging my lungs like ice, and when my gloved fingers brushed the metal scalpel handles, they burned with the kind of chill that seeps straight into bone. Miles finally looked up, maybe sensing how pale I must have been, and said curtly, "If you're spooked, go grab coffee upstairs." But I couldn't move, my gaze glued again to drawer 14, watching for any twitch, any vibration, any sign that it might open again, and then I heard it. Not from the drawer this time, but somewhere deeper, farther back along the cold storage wall. A faint rhythmic tapping, light and deliberate, like knuckles against metal. 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, 3. And I froze, holding my breath, counting the beats until it stopped. Miles didn't notice, or maybe he was pretending not to. His pen scratching mechanically as though denying the sound would make it disappear. But before I could ask him if he'd heard it, another noise cut through the room. A slow dragging, distant but distinct, something heavy sliding across metal somewhere behind the storage units too far back to see. My mind tried to rationalize it. Pipes shifting from temperature changes, mechanical stress on the rails, anything but what my gut whispered, that something inside was moving on its own. The air smelled different now too, metallic, sharp, like rust mixed with something faintly sweet. A cloying undertone I couldn't place, and it made my stomach twist. I wiped my palms against my scrubs despite the gloves, realizing too late how clammy they'd gotten, when suddenly the overhead lights flickered once, twice, buzzing angrily before steadying again. And in that half-second of darkness, I thought, I saw something move in the reflection of the stainless steel table, a quick shape low to the ground, darting from one wall to the next, there and gone before my eyes could focus. I jerked my head toward the corner instinctively, but the space was empty. Shadows stretched long and still across the floor under the harsh fluorescent glow. Miles finally sighed loudly, muttering, "Jesus, rookie, relax." But even his voice carried an edge now, thinner, brittle, like he was hearing it too but refusing to acknowledge it. And that denial made everything worse, made the quiet between sounds heavier, sharper. I forced myself to turn back to the paperwork, but my eyes kept darting to the edges of my vision. And then it came again. The tapping, louder this time, directly behind me, on the cold wall right where the refrigeration units lined up. 4 sharp knocks in perfect sequence, hollow but precise, like fingertips drumming deliberately against steel. I spun, heart pounding so violently I thought I'd be sick, but all I saw were the rows of drawers, silent and still, labels gleaming under pale light. I wanted to speak, to ask Miles if maybe we should check the seals, but before I could, there was a deep, dull thud from inside one of the lower drawers, muffled but unmistakable. The sound of something shifting hard against the inner metal, and my breath locked in my throat, the tray of instruments trembling slightly where my hands rested. On it, Miles stopped writing this time. He didn't look at me, didn't move, didn't say a word, just stared straight ahead at the wall, shoulders rigid, as though acknowledging it would somehow give it power. And in the silence that followed, I realized the hum of the refrigeration units had stopped entirely, leaving the morgue impossibly quiet, so still I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. Then from somewhere deep inside the wall, something scraped. Long, slow, deliberate, metal on metal, like nails dragging down the inside of a coffin. And I felt every hair on my arms rise beneath the layers of fabric, my breath coming in shallow bursts as the cold sank deeper into my bones. I wanted to leave, to run, to force my legs to move toward the door, but I stood there frozen, caught between instinct and disbelief, until the overhead lights flickered again, slower this time, buzzing faintly, and for the briefest moment in the dimming glow, I could have sworn I saw one of the middle drawers pulse outward just slightly, like something inside had pressed against it from within before retreating again. And the smell in the room thickened, copper and rot, making my throat tighten as the first creeping edge of panic finally broke through the numbness. I didn't want to believe what I had just seen, but my brain kept replaying it anyway. The way that one drawer had pulsed outward like something inside had pressed against it, testing the seal before pulling back into the darkness. And suddenly, the smell hit harder, thick and metallic, sharp with the unmistakable sting of copper and rot, making my stomach twist so violently I thought I might throw up right there, and I turned to Miles to say something, anything, but stopped when I saw his face. His jaw was tight, his hand frozen halfway down the clipboard, and even though he tried to act casual, his eyes gave him away, darting not toward me but toward the far wall like he was already expecting something, like he'd been waiting for this moment and hoping it wouldn't come. And just as I opened my mouth, the lights above us flickered violently once, twice, then died completely, plunging the entire morgue into absolute blackness. My first instinct was to reach for the flashlight clipped to my belt, but my hands fumbled uselessly in the dark, the silence around us impossibly thick now, without the comforting hum of the refrigeration units. And for a moment, the only thing I could hear was the sound of my own breath, sharp and uneven, until it hit me that there was another sound layered under it, faint but deliberate, something slow dragging along the far wall, like bare feet sliding over cold tile, soft but steady, coming closer with each second. "Miles?" I whispered, my voice breaking embarrassingly on the second syllable. But there was no answer, only the sound of movement and then a single metallic click, sharp and distinct, coming from the back corner where the oldest drawers were kept. And I strained my ears, holding my breath, waiting for another sound when suddenly a deep resonant thud shook through the wall, heavy enough that I felt it in my chest, and something inside me snapped, my body moving before my brain could stop it as I fumbled for my phone, hitting the screen instinctively for light. But the pale glow barely reached a few feet, illuminating just the edge of the autopsy table and Miles standing perfectly still, his face washed in gray-blue shadows, his eyes locked on something behind me. "Don't," he said suddenly, his voice low and tight, almost a hiss, and I froze mid-turn, my body rigid even as every nerve screamed at me to run. But before I could ask him what he meant, the dragging sound stopped, replaced by a single, soft inhale, sharp and wet from somewhere in the darkness behind my left shoulder, so close I felt a faint whisper of air brush against my ear, and the sensation was so wrong, so unnatural, I jerked forward instinctively and nearly slipped on, the slick tile beneath my shoes. My phone's weak light swung wildly, catching brief flashes of the room. Gleaming steel drawers, the glint of scattered instruments, the reflection of my own terrified face in the polished table surface. And then, just for a fraction of a second, something else. A figure impossibly pale, crouched low between two storage units, limbs bent at angles that didn't make sense, its head tilted too far back like a broken marionette. And when my light hit its face, I saw nothing but empty black sockets where eyes should have been, glossy and wet like freshly exposed flesh, before it scuttled backward into the shadows with an insect-like twitching motion so fast my brain struggled to process it. I stumbled, back nearly colliding with Miles, but he grabbed my arm hard, whispering through clenched teeth, "Don't look at it. Just don't." His grip was iron, unnatural, and the panic rising in my chest became unbearable, my breath coming in ragged gasps, when somewhere behind us, from the direction of drawer 14 came a low, rhythmic banging, steady and deliberate, like fists pounding against the inside from deep within, once, twice, 3 times, vibrating through the air in heavy, dull thuds. And I turned instinctively, but Miles yanked me back, whispering furiously, "I said don't look." His voice cracked on the last word, and that was the moment I realized with a sick lurch that he wasn't surprised, he wasn't confused, he was terrified because he already knew something about this place, about whatever the hell was happening here, and the dread that had been building in my chest shifted into something colder, deeper, a crawling awareness that we weren't alone, not in the way I'd thought before, and as if to confirm it, the tapping returned. This time, not from one drawer, but from several, scattered and uneven, like fingertips drumming from different directions all at once, a chaotic code my brain refused to decipher. And above us, somewhere beyond the ceiling, I heard a long groan of metal, as if something heavy was shifting directly overhead, crawling slowly across the beams, the sound stretching out forever in the suffocating dark until, without warning, the phone in my hand buzzed violently, the screen flashing no signal, in bold letters just before it went black, leaving us blind, silent, and utterly trapped in the pitch-black morgue as something wet and cold brushed across the back of my neck. The sound of the metal latches snapping open beneath us didn't stop. One after another, quick mechanical clicks echoed through the vents like distant gunfire, moving deeper into the lower morgue chambers, and I couldn't breathe as I counted. Them 5, 7, 10, maybe more, until the sound stretched into an unbroken metallic rattle that made the walls hum beneath my fingertips. Tommy was muttering under his breath, pacing in the corner like a trapped animal, his sneakers squeaking faintly on the cold tile, while Dr. Gray just stood perfectly still, staring at drawer 17 like he was working through an impossible equation in his head. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Nothing moved, not Sarah, not the other drawers, not us. My own heartbeat felt deafening in my ears, and then, without warning, the lights flickered once, twice, and plunged us into complete darkness. I froze. Somewhere to my left, Tommy cursed and fumbled with his phone flashlight, but before he could turn it on, the security panel above the door beeped sharply, followed by the distinct mechanical whir of the magnetic lock disengaging. The door creaked open on its own, spilling a narrow blade of pale light from the hallway into the cold room. But the moment I felt relief, that thin strip of light vanished. The hallway went dark, too. I don't know why, but I stepped forward. Anyway, my sneakers crunching softly against the frost-speckled tile, trying to peer through the shadows when I heard it for the first time. A dragging sound. Slow. Deliberate. Like heavy cloth being pulled across cement. It was faint at first, distant, coming from somewhere below us. But as I strained to listen, it grew clearer, climbing, reverberating through the vent shafts in rhythmic pulses, as though whatever was moving down there had purpose, and I could swear with each pause between drags, I heard something else layered underneath, the wet, sticky sound of bare feet against concrete. Tommy finally managed to turn on his phone light, the small beam shaking in his trembling hand, sweeping wildly across the room before landing on Sarah Whitmore again. She hadn't moved, but her eyes were still open, staring up at the ceiling like she could see through the floors above us. Her lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear, and then Dr. Gray leaned closer, catching the faint rasp she exhaled. His face went pale instantly. "She says we're not supposed to be here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "She says this isn't for us." Before I could process what he meant, a deafening bang erupted from beneath the floor, shaking the trays violently on their rails, the metallic clatter bouncing off the walls until my teeth rattled. Sarah's body convulsed once, jerking unnaturally against the steel, and then drawer 18 burst open without anyone touching it. There was nothing inside. Nothing but deep claw marks scratched into the lining, as though something had been thrashing, violently trying to get out, but there was no body, no sheet, just deep gouges where nails or something worse had dug into the metal. Tommy started shouting that we had to leave right now, but Dr. Gray's voice cut through him like a scalpel, sharp and steady despite the tremor I could hear underneath. "Nobody leaves until I understand what's happening," he said, turning toward the hallway. "We need the master panel. It controls the sublevel." Sublevel, the word made my stomach twist. I'd worked here for 6 months and never even knew there was a lower chamber, but Dr. Gray was already moving, and somehow my feet followed without my permission, Tommy stumbling close behind me. As we stepped into the dark hallway, the overhead emergency lights flickered faintly, casting the walls in a dim red glow that made the concrete look wet and breathing. The dragging sound was louder now, not just through the vents anymore, but echoing faintly up the stairwell ahead, where a heavy door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" stood slightly ajar, the dark gap beneath it spilling cold air that smelled faintly metallic like rust and something rotting beneath ice. Dr. Gray hesitated just a second, his gloved hand hovering over the steel handle, before finally pushing it open, and the three of us were swallowed by a damp, heavy silence as we descended into the lower morgue. The air grew thicker, colder, each step taking us deeper underground until the faint emergency lights vanished entirely, and only Tommy's phone beam guided us forward. Rows of newer drawers lined both walls, stacked floor to ceiling, hundreds of them. But what made my skin crawl wasn't how many there were, it was how many of them were open. At least a dozen trays had been pulled halfway out, white sheets hanging limply over the edges, and every single one was empty. Dr. Gray scanned the corridor slowly, his penlight useless compared to the shadows that swallowed everything beyond 10 feet. "No one's authorized down here without clearance," he whispered, as though saying it louder might wake something. "These bodies they're special cases." I asked him what he meant, but before he could answer, a faint, clicking sound came from behind us. We all turned at once, Tommy swinging the light back toward the stairs, and for half a second I thought maybe it was just the old vents creaking again. until I saw them. Footprints, bare, wet. They stretched across the concrete floor in a staggered path glistening under the beam, starting somewhere deep in the corridor ahead and leading directly past us toward the stairs we'd just come down. But there was no one there. I crouched instinctively, touching one with my glove, and my breath caught when I realized they weren't wet with water. They were wet with blood. Before we could move, a noise tore through the silence, sharp and guttural, echoing down the corridor from somewhere far ahead. It was low at first, almost human, like someone choking back air, but then it grew louder, harsher, collapsing into a sound that didn't belong to any living thing I've ever heard. Tommy dropped his phone. The light went spinning wildly across the tiles until it landed on something moving in the distance, just beyond the last row of drawers. For a split second I saw it. A silhouette, tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long, head tilted unnaturally to one side like its neck was broken. And then the light went out completely. In the pitch-black silence, I heard Dr. Gray inhale, sharply, his breath trembling as he whispered words I wish I hadn't heard. "This isn't human." The silence after Dr. Gray whispered those words felt heavier than the dark itself, pressing against my chest until I couldn't breathe. And somewhere behind me, Tommy's ragged breathing filled the space, sharp and shallow like a kid trying not to cry, his dropped phone lying face down on the floor, its light gone, leaving us swallowed whole by a blackness so deep it felt alive. And that was when I heard it again. The dragging sound, closer this time, coming from deep within the sublevel corridor where the rows of open drawers lined both walls like silent sentinels. And mixed in with that soft scrape against the concrete was another sound, faint but steady, like fingernails ticking rhythmically against metal in a deliberate pattern. And I realized it was coming from several places at once, as though there was more than one thing down there with us. More than one moving. I reached blindly for Tommy's arm, trying to steady my voice, but it came out cracked when I whispered his name. And then Dr. Gray hissed sharply for both of us to stay still, his breath warm against the cold air as he leaned close and whispered, so softly I could barely hear him, "Don't move, don't breathe, it reacts to sound." And before I could ask him what he meant, the temperature dropped so suddenly it was like stepping into a freezer, our breaths turning to white vapor in front of our faces. Frost beginning to form along the edges of the drawers, and somewhere above us the old pipes groaned under the weight of condensed air, dripping cold water that hit the floor with sharp, needle-like sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Then, without warning, Tommy's phone buzzed on the floor with a sudden vibration that made me flinch violently, and before I could kick it silent, something in the darkness shifted. The dragging stopped instantly, replaced by that faint wet shuffle of bare feet against cement, now quicker, purposeful, and coming straight toward us from the far end of the corridor. I grabbed Tommy by the collar and yanked him backward while Dr. Gray's hand shot out, fumbling for the wall, searching blindly until his fingers found a narrow panel recessed into the concrete, and with a quick twist of his keycard, the emergency lights above us hummed faintly to life, bathing the sublevel in a dim red glow so sickly and weak it made everything worse instead of better. Because now we could see the rows of open drawers stretching endlessly in both directions, and the bloody footprints weaving between them. Fresh, glistening and leading into the shadows ahead where the corridor bent sharply to the right. And that was when we saw it again. The figure was standing perfectly still just beyond the glow, impossibly tall and thin, its shoulders hunched and head tilted so far to the side it looked broken, one arm dangling longer than the other, fingertips grazing the floor. And though its face was obscured by shadow, its eyes caught the red light and reflected it back in two glimmering pinpoints, bright and unnatural, and I swear I saw its lips curl into something between a grin and a snarl before it stepped backward and vanished, around the corner without a sound. Tommy cursed under his breath, his voice high and breaking, but Dr. Gray didn't move, didn't even blink, just stared at the place where it disappeared before finally whispering under his breath, "It's still experimenting," and I snapped at him, demanding he explain. But instead of answering me, he knelt quickly by one of the open drawers, his gloved hands rifling through a stack of sealed folders marked with government insignias I'd never seen before, pulling one out and flipping it open under the weak red light, his voice shaking as he read, "Classified storage, Level 3. Off-record fatalities, he muttered, almost to himself, and when I pressed harder, he finally looked up, his pale face slick with cold sweat, and said something that made my stomach drop. These aren't ordinary cadavers, they're subjects, case studies, all tied to incidents where biological responses changed after death. I didn't understand at first, and Tommy clearly didn't either, until the meaning hit both of us at once. The bodies stored down here weren't just victims, they were experiments. Something had been done to them, and before I could respond, one of the drawers behind us slammed shut violently on its own, the echo cracking through the hallway like a gunshot. And then another slammed, and another, until the sound multiplied down the corridor like a wave, drawer after drawer clanging shut in a deafening chain reaction until the entire sublevel roared with the metallic thunder of moving steel. And over that chaos came a sound I'll never forget. A low, guttural groan that started deep beneath the floor and rose like pressure in a boiling pipe, vibrating through the walls until my ears popped and Tommy fell to his knees, clutching his head. Dr. Gray grabbed my arm with surprising strength, dragging me backward toward a small maintenance hatch halfway down the wall, his voice a hoarse whisper against the noise. "If we stay in the main corridor, we're dead. Move." I didn't argue. We stumbled toward the hatch, forcing it open just as something massive slammed into the far end of the hallway. The lights flickering violently, and for a fraction of a second, I saw that long, thin silhouette again. But now there were more than 1, 3, maybe 4, standing motionless just beyond the dying red glow, their reflective eyes fixed on us in perfect unison like predators deciding which of us to take first. Tommy started sobbing quietly, his whole body trembling, and I had to shove him through the hatch before climbing in after him, the icy air wrapping around us as Dr. Gray pulled the panel shut silently behind us, sealing us inside a narrow maintenance tunnel barely wide enough to crawl through. And for a long moment none of us moved, holding our breath in the claustrophobic dark, until we heard them. The footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy against the concrete, walking past where we hid. But then one set stopped directly outside the hatch and something scraped softly along the metal panel, slow and drawn out, like claws testing the barrier. And then, as if whatever it was leaned close enough to smell us, the faintest rasp of breath seeped through the crack, warm and damp against the back of my neck in the freezing air. And that was when I realized something far worse than I had imagined. They knew exactly where we were hiding. The silence inside the maintenance tunnel was unbearable, so thick it felt like the air itself had weight, and every second stretched endlessly as we crouched there in the freezing dark, our breaths shallow and ragged. The only sound, the faint creak of metal expanding under the sudden drop in temperature, until the scraping outside the hatch stopped, and for a fleeting moment I thought maybe, just maybe, they were moving away. But then the sound changed, soft at first. A faint wet tap 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 that grew louder with each repetition, until I realized with a jolt that it wasn't claws at all but fingertips, slow and deliberate, tracing shapes across the metal, like someone spelling out words we couldn't understand. And Tommy's trembling hand closed around my wrist so tight I felt his nails dig into my skin, his whisper breaking into my ear like dry glass. It knows we're in here. And I wanted to tell him to shut up, to breathe quieter, but my throat locked because in that exact instant, the tapping stopped, and the silence that followed felt alive, like the tunnel itself was listening. Dr. Gray leaned forward until his face was inches from mine, his voice low, almost inaudible. "If we run, we die. But if we stay?" He didn't finish the sentence, just looked at me with eyes that reflected the dim emergency light filtering through the tiny vent above, and I saw for the first time that he wasn't just afraid, he was terrified, like a man facing something he had already met before. Before I could process that, the faintest sound rippled through the tunnel behind us, the metallic echo of something crawling, soft, rhythmic, unhurried, and I twisted around just enough to glimpse movement in the narrow darkness, a shadow dragging itself along the lower grate, pulling its body forward without lifting its limbs like a spider moving on broken legs, and my stomach lurched violently as I realized there wasn't just one of them down here. There were two, maybe more, cutting us off from both ends. Tommy's breathing spiraled into panicked gasps, and I clamped a hand over his mouth, feeling his chest hammering beneath my palm. When suddenly, Dr. Gray reached into his coat and pulled out something I hadn't seen before. A small black cylinder, with a trigger, faintly humming like an insect trapped in glass. "When I fire this," he whispered, his hand trembling, "you run. Don't stop. Don't look back." I wanted to ask what it was, but before the words formed, the scraping returned outside the hatch. Louder now, followed by a slow, rhythmic thud against the panel like someone knocking. And then we all froze when the knocking stopped, and a voice spoke from the other side, soft, broken, impossibly close. "Awake." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, drawn out on a breath that rasped like sandpaper. And that one word was enough to paralyze me completely because it wasn't coming from any human throat. There was something wrong in its pitch. Something distorted, like overlapping. Voices played out of sync, and Tommy whimpered into my hand, his tears soaking my fingers while Dr. Gray closed his eyes and whispered under his breath, "Not yet, please God, not yet." The voice came again, slower this time. "Awake. Come see." And with that, the panel shuddered violently as something struck it from the other side, sending a sharp metallic clang down the entire tunnel, the sound bouncing endlessly, until I thought my eardrums would split. And without waiting for a second hit, Dr. Gray jammed his keycard into a recessed panel by his knee, and the crawlspace lights flickered to life, bathing us in a dim orange glow that revealed something I wish I hadn't seen. The tunnel walls were covered in faint symbols etched deep into the steel, spirals and jagged lines that looked burned into the metal itself, old, ancient, and smeared, with something dark that flaked when the light touched it. I wanted to ask what they were, but Dr. Gray didn't answer, just shoved the humming cylinder into my hand and pointed down the narrow shaft, mouthing the word "run," and so I did, dragging Tommy behind me as we crawled as fast as we could, the rough metal tearing at my knees while behind us came a deafening screech as the hatch exploded inward. Metal twisting like paper, and I risked one glance back to see the silhouette ducking into the tunnel, impossibly thin and wrong. Its head cocked at a broken angle, its fingers so long they scraped against both walls as it began to follow us, moving faster than anything that should be able to crawl, and its glowing eyes locked onto mine with such perfect focus that I nearly froze right there. But Dr. Gray grabbed the back of my shirt and shoved me forward, his voice finally breaking into a ragged shout. "Move!" We turned a sharp bend, the tunnel splitting into two paths, and without hesitation Dr. Gray yanked us toward the left passage, just as a second shadow dropped from a vent above, landing where we would have been if we'd kept straight. The impact, rattling the entire shaft as it twisted unnaturally and scuttled along the ceiling like some obscene insect. Tommy screamed into my shoulder, muffled and raw, and I didn't even know where I was crawling anymore. Just following Dr. Gray's heels as the sound of pursuit filled every inch of space around us. The scraping, the panting, the guttural clicks, rising and falling in a sickening rhythm. Closer every second until Dr. Gray suddenly stopped in front of a vertical shaft no wider than a manhole, yanked open a grated cover, and pointed up into a narrow darkness broken only by the faint glint of steel rungs. "Climb," he gasped, shoving Tommy upward first, and the kid scrambled blindly into the dark, his hand slipping on the frost-slick metal, and as soon as he cleared the first few rungs, I followed, lungs burning, legs cramping, the cylinder clutched between my teeth until we were all halfway up when something slammed into the bottom of the shaft hard enough to shake the ladder, making my grip nearly slip, and when I looked down I saw its face for the first time, not fully but enough to burn it into my brain forever. Pale, stretched skin pulled so tight over bone it looked brittle, a jaw unhinged wider than it should have been, teeth slick and sharp like shards of broken glass, and those orange reflective eyes staring up at me, locked, unblinking, hateful, as one skeletal hand reached into the shaft, its nails clicking against the rung below my foot. And just as its fingertips brushed the sole of my boot, Dr. Gray triggered something on his watch and the lights above us pulsed once, and suddenly the entire ladder vibrated violently as a surge of electrical current tore downward, filling the shaft with the stench of burning flesh and a sound that wasn't quite a scream but something far worse, something layered, fractured, as if 3 different voices were howling at once, and the thing recoiled violently, slamming back into the darkness below. But I knew we hadn't killed it. I knew from the ragged, wet sound of its breathing that it was still down there, waiting. And as we climbed into the upper chamber, gasping for air, I realized the truth that froze me more than anything else. There weren't just 2 of them, and probably not even 4, because somewhere below us, from deep inside the sealed sublevels, I heard the unmistakable sound of dozens of drawers sliding open in perfect unison. The chamber above the shaft was small, circular, lined with frost-crusted pipes that pulsed faintly with heat from somewhere deep beneath the morgue, and the moment we pulled ourselves inside, I collapsed against the grated floor, chest heaving, every muscle burning from the climb. But there was no time to rest, because from below us, rising up through the metal ladder shaft like smoke, came the sound of more drawers sliding open, one after another, perfectly synchronized like some orchestrated ritual, and I realized with a creeping horror that the 2 things hunting us weren't alone. They had never been alone. This entire time we'd been walking through a nest, and Tommy must have realized the same, because he was whispering over and over, "No, no, no, no," rocking slightly on his knees until Dr. Gray gripped his shoulders hard enough to steady him, his own face pale and drenched in sweat as he hissed through clenched teeth, "They're waking up, God help us, we didn't shut the system down in time." And I wanted to scream at him, demand an explanation, but the sound of something slamming violently against the lower hatch cut me off, the entire grate beneath us rattling as if something massive had climbed halfway back up and was throwing itself against the underside, trying to break through. And the entire chamber reverberated with the metal-on-metal impact, louder and louder, until finally I choked out, "What the hell are they?" And Dr. Gray's gaze locked on mine, empty and haunted. "They were supposed to be dormant," he rasped, his voice cracking as if he was forcing the words out against his will. "Stasis wasn't designed for this. We were testing post-mortem, consciousness retention, mapping synaptic activity in cadavers, just monitoring. They weren't supposed to wake up," and something cold and sick pooled in my stomach, because I understood then. Maybe not the full science, but enough. The morgue wasn't a morgue at all. It was a facility, a testing ground. And we weren't surrounded by ghosts. We were trapped inside a failed experiment where the dead didn't stay dead. And before I could process that, the lights above us flickered violently, plunging the chamber into a strobe of orange and shadow. And from somewhere beyond the door ahead came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, dragging across the steel floor, heavier than before, more than one set this time, and I could hear the faint wet clicking of nails against metal, a sound that made every hair on my arms rise as adrenaline screamed at me to move. But Dr. Gray held up a hand, signaling us to stay absolutely silent, even as Tommy's small whimpers shook his entire body, and then, from the other side of the door, a faint metallic rattle like someone testing the handle, followed by a slow creak as it began to open, inch by inch, and the emergency lights cut completely, plunging us into total darkness so deep it felt physical, like drowning in black water, and I couldn't even see my own hands inches from my face, only the faint vibration of the floor beneath me as something heavy stepped into the chamber, and then another, and another. Their weight bending the metal grates slightly under each step, and the air went cold, unnaturally cold, the kind of cold that burns your throat when you breathe. And then something brushed against my ankle so soft I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, until Tommy let out a tiny yelp and the world exploded into chaos. Dr. Gray grabbed the small cylinder from my hand, twisted its base until it hummed louder than before, and a blinding arc of pale blue light erupted from the tip, cutting across the chamber like lightning and illuminating them for the first time. The things that had come out of the drawers weren't like the first 2 we'd seen. These were worse, taller, skeletal figures whose skin clung in damp sheets over bone, their jaws slack but twitching as if muscles were trying to remember how to work, their blackened veins tracing like cracked glass beneath the flesh. And their eyes, God, their eyes, glowed the same unnatural orange but duller, flickering, as if something inside them was still calibrating, and one of them opened its mouth to let out a sound that wasn't human, wasn't animal, just layers of broken frequencies collapsing over each other until it was almost a scream and almost static, and then all 3 lunged forward at once. Dr. Gray fired the cylinder and one of them convulsed violently, collapsing in a jerking heap as smoke poured from its mouth. But the other two didn't even flinch, moving impossibly fast for their frame, scuttling low to the floor like shadows unhinged from their bodies, and I grabbed Tommy and dove behind one of the massive coolant pipes as claws scraped across the steel where we'd just been, throwing sparks into the darkness. And before I could think, Dr. Gray yelled, "The east maintenance lock, go!" And I didn't hesitate, pulling Tommy by the collar as we sprinted along the curved platform, the grated floor vibrating beneath us from their weight, the sound of their nails tearing into metal so close it was deafening, until finally we reached a narrow hatch labeled Access D17, and I slammed the manual release lever so hard my palm split open, blood slicking the handle. But the door finally gave way and we shoved ourselves into a tight auxiliary shaft, bolting it behind us just as one of them slammed against it, the steel bulging inward under the force of the hit. And Tommy screamed again, but I covered his mouth instantly, holding him against my chest, feeling his heart pounding so fast it barely seemed possible. And through the ringing in my ears, I finally heard them outside, the wet dragging of their limbs against the door, the metallic tapping, and beneath it all, faint but unmistakable, a single voice whispering, "Awake." Exactly like before, only this time it wasn't coming from one throat but dozens, overlapping perfectly in unison. And when I turned to Dr. Gray in the darkness, his face was ashen, his lips trembling as he muttered almost to himself, "If they're all awake, we're already dead." The auxiliary shaft was so narrow I could barely turn my head, the air damp and stinking of rust and coolant, and as I pressed my back against the cold metal wall, trying to steady my breathing, I could still hear them on the other side of the hatch, scraping and dragging their limbs across the steel, soft, wet thuds as their bodies shifted unnaturally close, and underneath it all that low, layered whisper rolling over itself like static on a broken radio. "Awake, awake, awake." Until the sound merged into one endless pulse that drilled into my skull, and Tommy was shaking violently against me, muffling his sobs into my chest while Dr. Gray crouched in the corner clutching that humming cylinder like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to sanity. His glasses cracked and one lens reflecting the faint emergency glow from a panel on the wall. And finally, I managed to force my voice low enough to whisper, "What the hell is happening? Tell me now." And for a long moment he didn't answer, just stared past me into nothing before rasping, "Stasis was supposed to be containment, fail-safe protocols, but the system..." He broke off, his hand trembling as he wiped sweat from his forehead. "The system thinks you're one of them." And my stomach dropped like the floor had vanished beneath me, my throat tight as I croaked, "What the hell does that mean?" But before he could respond, the emergency panel on the wall erupted with a deafening klaxon, the red light pulsing in sync with the siren as the display scrolled a single repeating phrase in sharp block letters. "Override initiated. Stasis. Protocol compromised." And then all at once the soft whispers outside the hatch stopped, cut off mid-breath, replaced by silence so absolute it roared in my ears, and for the briefest moment I thought maybe they'd left. Maybe the sound had been in my head until the metal beneath us began to vibrate, faintly at first, then harder, like a distant engine coming to life. And then the lights embedded in the walls flickered violently before dying completely, plunging us into a darkness so deep I couldn't even see my own hand pressed against Tommy's shaking back. And then from somewhere far below came a sound I will never forget. 100, maybe 200 drawers sliding open in perfect synchronization, like some massive machine unlocking its secrets all at once, the vibrations carrying through the shaft walls straight into my bones. And Tommy whimpered, "Oh God, there's more of them." But Dr. Gray grabbed him by the jaw, his voice low and urgent. "Listen to me, both of you. There aren't more of them. There's all of them. Every single subject from Phase 1 through Phase 4. And if the containment grid is offline, we're already inside their hunting ground." And then the hatch behind us buckled hard enough to dent inward, the metal screeching so loud it set my teeth on edge, and a thin crack split across the seam, pale steam venting through like the breath of something monstrous forcing its way in. And without thinking, I shoved Tommy deeper into the shaft, yelling at Dr. Gray to move. But he was frozen, staring at the cylinder in his hands, whispering to himself, "It won't hold them. God forgive me." It won't hold any of them. And then the panel behind him sparked, showering the shaft with glowing embers. And an automated voice crackled faintly from the speaker above us, distorted and robotic. Manual purge sequence initialized. Non-essential biological entities will be cleared. And I felt my blood run cold because I didn't know what that meant. But Dr. Gray clearly did, because his head snapped up, his face going white. That's not a security lockdown. That's sterilization. We have to move now. And I didn't ask questions, just grabbed Tommy and started crawling through the shaft as fast as I could. My palms tearing open against the grating, my knees raw, the steel reverberating beneath us with the sound of something slamming against the hatch again and again until the bolts screamed like they were seconds from snapping. And then ahead of us, faint at first but growing louder, came a different sound. Footsteps, not behind us this time, but somewhere deeper inside the shaft system. Heavy, deliberate, not running, but approaching steadily like whatever was coming. Didn't need to rush because it knew there was nowhere left for us to go. And I whipped my head around trying to see past the darkness. But there was nothing. No light. No shape. Just the sound of metal creaking and the low, deliberate scrape of something dragging behind the footsteps, and Dr. Gray hissed, keep going, don't stop." But before we could move another inch, the emergency lights snapped back on, flooding the shaft with harsh orange strobe and revealing, just 20 feet ahead, a figure crouched low in the passage, its limbs bent wrong, joints reversed like they'd been broken and reset backward. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle as it watched us with those same faint orange glowing eyes. But this one was different. The glow wasn't flickering like the others, steady and sharp like it was fully awake, fully aware. And when it opened its mouth, the sound it made wasn't the layered, static scream of the others. It spoke, the words distorted but intelligible. Protocol. Failed. And my entire body went numb because there was thought behind those words, not instinct, not hunger, but understanding. And before I could react, it started moving toward us, crawling along the shaft walls and ceiling like gravity didn't matter. Impossibly fast, and Dr. Gray fired the cylinder. But instead of collapsing like the others, it caught the charge with its bare hand, absorbing the electrical surge until the cylinder sparked and went dead, and it tilted its head further, a broken smile stretching its cracked lips as it rasped, "Not yours anymore," and lunged straight at us. It hit the grate so hard the entire shaft buckled beneath us, the shockwave rattling my teeth and throwing Tommy forward into the metal mesh as Dr. Gray screamed something I couldn't make out over the blast of sound. But the thing didn't stop. It recovered mid-impact, limbs twisting unnaturally as it pushed itself back onto the ceiling, moving like it had no bones at all. And for one suspended heartbeat I couldn't breathe, frozen watching it scuttle forward on reversed joints, with those burning amber eyes locked on mine like it recognized me, like it knew me. And just before it lunged, the alarms above our heads cut into a high-pitched whine that drilled into my skull, the voice of the automated system overriding everything. Primary stasis grid failure, initiating level 5 containment purge, and instantly the entire shaft plunged into a roar of air pressure shifting, the temperature dropping 20 degrees in seconds until each breath burned my lungs like ice, and then the walls themselves started to move, plates sliding back, vents snapping open, releasing something like steam but heavier, thicker, sinking low into the tunnel and pooling along the floor as the system began flooding the lower levels. And Dr. Gray's face went sheet white under the pulsing amber light, his glasses fogging instantly as he screamed above the sirens. "They're venting nitrogen. They're suffocating everything below level 3. Move!" And I didn't think. I just grabbed Tommy by his jacket and shoved him forward, dragging him behind me on shredded knees while the walls shook violently with each impact of the thing chasing us, its claws sparking against the metal as it came, moving faster than any human should be able to move. Faster than anything dead should be able to move. And then up ahead, a blast door slammed down in slow motion, the hydraulics stuttering as the emergency system tried to seal us in. And I knew if it closed completely, we'd be trapped in here with it. No air, no light, just me, Tommy, Dr. Gray, and that thing crawling across the ceiling with its mouth hanging open like a wound. So I threw myself forward, pulling Tommy with me, sliding under the narrowing gap with a scream tearing out of my throat as Dr. Gray dove after us at the last possible second, his containment cylinder skittering away across the floor, and as the door slammed shut behind us, there was a deafening, wet impact. The thing slamming into the steel with such force it left a dent outward, but it didn't follow, not immediately, and for one wild second I thought maybe we were safe until we all heard it. Faint at first, but growing louder. That whispering again, thousands of overlapping voices, layered perfectly until it didn't sound like noise anymore, but like some kind of code, a pattern, deliberate, calculated, and Tommy whimpered something incoherent as Dr. Gray bent over, both hands on his knees, trying to suck in what little oxygen was left in the shaft, his voice breaking as he muttered, "This wasn't supposed to happen. The override is older than I thought. They're pulling commands from the deep archive. Someone woke the alpha stages." And I snapped at him to explain. But he didn't. He just looked at me with this hollow, shaking stare and said, "They weren't patients. They weren't even human anymore after Phase 3. They're not supposed to think, not supposed to coordinate. But if they're pulling from the archive, God help us, they're remembering." And my stomach turned ice as I realized what he meant. These things weren't wandering blindly. They weren't broken corpses acting on instinct. They were reassembling everything they'd ever been, everyone they'd ever been, layered into, whatever they were now, and that meant they weren't just dangerous. They were strategizing, evolving, adapting in real time. And as if to prove his point, the dented blast door behind us shuddered violently, a deep, resonant boom like something massive was testing its strength against the hydraulics, and then silence, and then a faint clicking sound from beyond it, like claws tapping on glass, rhythmic, counting, almost, communicating, and Dr. Gray stiffened instantly, whispering under his breath, "That's not for us, that's for them." And I realized with a sick twist in my gut he meant the others, the hundreds of drawers we'd heard unlocking below us. They weren't acting independently. This thing on the other side of the door was coordinating them, directing them like pieces on a board, and I almost threw up right there when another system voice broke in overhead, calm and clinical as ever. "Core access authorized, opening archive vaults," and every light in the shaft dimmed at once, plunging us into a deep orange gloom. And Dr. Gray's head jerked up sharply, his voice hoarse as he said, No, they're unlocking the central stacks. The morgue isn't just storage, it's interface. Jesus Christ, we have to get below the cold floors before they do." And Tommy croaked out, barely above a whisper, "Below the what?" But Gray ignored him, grabbing the cylinder from the ground and jamming something on the side. A hiss venting out before he said, "They buried the alpha lattice under the original foundation before the morgue was even a morgue. 5 sublevels. Down, there's a manual cutoff there. If we don't reach it before them, they'll push beyond the grid." And my chest locked up because I realized what he was saying. They weren't just waking up the bodies here. If they hit that core, they could wake every archived subject across the network, every drawer, every site linked into stasis protocol, and there would be no containing them, ever. But before I could process the weight of that, something behind. The sealed blast door hissed softly, not mechanical but wet, alive. And then a pale, bony hand slid through the thin seam between the frame and the steel, twisting unnaturally to probe for the lock. And I knew the hydraulics weren't going to hold, not against this. So I screamed at Dr. Gray to move, and we bolted, racing deeper into the auxiliary shaft until it forked down into a spiral access ladder that looked older than the rest of the facility, rusted around the bolts and covered in frost. And Gray didn't hesitate, swinging onto the rungs and shouting over his shoulder, "If you breathe deep, you're dead. Shallow, fast, stay. Conscious, there's no O2 feed below level 3. And we climbed, our bodies aching, lungs burning, the low-frequency hum of the facility's purge systems vibrating up through the steel into my bones. As somewhere above us, the sealed blast door gave one last tortured groan before tearing free of its hinges, and the thing dropped into the shaft. Above, its claws raking sparks as it began to descend after us faster than we could possibly move. And Dr. Gray shouted something I couldn't make out, but whatever it was, it made Tommy scream. And then suddenly the shaft opened into a vast, hollow space. Black walls sweating condensation, frozen air biting at my face as we stumbled onto a narrow grated platforms suspended above an abyss so deep I couldn't see the bottom. And far below us, hundreds of feet down, there was light. Not fire, not electricity, but something organic, amber, and alive, pulsing in slow waves through a massive glass-like structure built into the rock. And as I stared down, I realized with creeping horror that it wasn't glass at all. It was rows of stacked containment chambers descending into the earth. Endless drawers built straight into the bedrock, each glowing faintly in rhythm with the next, like a living neural network buried beneath the morgue. And I knew without needing Dr. Gray to confirm it. This was the Alpha Lattice. This was what they'd been hiding. And the moment I understood it, something deep below shifted in the lightless black, like something the size of the entire chamber had just woken up and was turning slowly toward us. For a moment I couldn't breathe, frozen on the grated platform while staring down into the endless black where the amber pulses rippled like the slow beat of a giant heart buried beneath the earth, each wave perfectly synchronized as though the drawers themselves were connected, communicating, and Dr. Gray was muttering something behind me, half to himself, words tumbling so fast I barely caught fragments. "It's awake. It's reading us. It knows we're here." And then, the platform beneath our feet shuddered violently, the entire lattice groaning with a sound so deep I felt it in my ribs. And far below, one of the glowing chambers flared brighter than the rest, a brilliant burst of orange-white before dimming again, and with it came the whispering, not faint, this time but everywhere, inside my head, layered voices overlapping like the memory of a crowd recorded backwards. And I staggered, clutching the railing as my vision fractured into static flashes, images that weren't mine burning into my brain, a surgical theater drenched in cold light, metal tables lined with bodies, a man screaming my name though I didn't know him, and a single phrase repeating beneath it all like a command embedded in bone. Sequence 0 authorized. I gasped, dragging air into lungs that wouldn't work, and Dr. Gray grabbed my shoulder hard, shaking me, yelling something about resonance bleed. But his words came from far away, muffled and distant, as the voices inside my head surged, higher until one of them, one clear, distinct, impossibly familiar, cut through the chaos and said, "Elliot." My name. It said my name like it remembered me, like it knew me, and every nerve in my body lit up at once as I stumbled back against the railing, shaking my head violently, whispering, No, that's not me. I don't know you." But then Tommy was shouting something and pointing toward the shaft above us where the same thing that had chased us through the blast door, was dropping down the ladder like a spider, its limbs bent at impossible angles, head twitching with a violent spasm as its amber eyes locked onto me again. Not Dr. Gray, not Tommy, just me. And I knew then without question it recognized me too. And Dr. Gray cursed violently, dragging the cylinder onto the platform and slamming his palm against a recessed panel that hissed open, revealing a syringe filled with some black, viscous fluid that seemed to shimmer in the pulsing lattice light. And he screamed over the roar of the approaching thing, "If it's keyed to you, it means you're carrying the lock code. Do you understand me, Elliot? They imprinted your genome during the sequence trials. You're in their archive. They need you to finish the bridge." And my mind rejected it instantly, every cell in my body screaming denial. But some part of me knew, deep down, he wasn't lying. And I didn't have time to ask how or why because the thing reached the platform in a blur of motion, slamming claws into the steel and tearing straight through as the entire structure groaned and swayed dangerously above the abyss. And I grabbed Tommy and shoved him toward the spiral conduit leading down to the lower gantries as Dr. Gray jammed the syringe into the cylinder, twisting it violently, triggering something inside that unleashed a blinding white arc of energy so violent it split the shadows around us like lightning. And the thing screeched, a piercing wet sound that made blood trickle from my ears before retreating into the darkness above. But I knew it wasn't gone, not defeated, just waiting, calculating, hunting. And then below us, deep within the glowing lattice, something else stirred, heavier, slower, ancient. The amber pulses accelerating into a syncopated rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart, and Dr. Gray collapsed to his knees, both hands clutching his head, whispering, "It's syncing with you. It's mapping you. You're the trigger." And before I could respond, the grated platform beneath us split apart with a violent shriek, sending metal plunging into the abyss, and we were falling, free-falling into the freezing black until a maintenance gantry caught us halfway down with bone-cracking force, the impact knocking the air out of my lungs and sending Tommy sliding dangerously toward the edge before I caught his wrist just in time, hauling him back as he sobbed into his sleeve. But there was no time for comfort because the lattice itself was changing, drawers sliding open one by one in a perfect wave down the walls of the cavern, each revealing a body suspended in some clear viscous medium, thousands of them, men and women in shapes I didn't recognize, all perfectly still, all perfectly preserved, and yet I could feel them. Hundreds of layered voices whispering in my skull now, forming something coherent, something deliberate. We are awake. The sound wasn't sound. It was pressure behind my eyes, and I stumbled back until my shoulders hit cold steel, fighting against the growing pull in my chest like something was trying to draw me into the lattice itself. And Dr. Gray was shouting again, his voice breaking. "Elliot, listen to me. They seeded you for access. You're the last living key to the archive. If they complete synchronization, you won't be you anymore. You'll be them, all of them. And there's no coming back." And my throat went dry as the meaning hit me like ice water, because that was why the thing in the shaft hadn't killed me when it had the chance. It wasn't trying to destroy me. It was trying to deliver me. And as the realization clicked into place, the amber pulses suddenly stopped, frozen mid-beat. And in that silence, absolute and crushing, I heard a single wet footstep, echoing from somewhere deep in the dark below, us heavier than anything human, followed by another and another, slow, deliberate, patient, and the metal gantry beneath us vibrated with each impact as something impossibly massive began to climb upward toward us, through the stacked drawers, dislodging entire racks of containment chambers as it came. And Tommy grabbed my arm so hard, his nails cut into my skin, his voice breaking into a whisper that sounded like a prayer. "We shouldn't be here, man. We're not supposed to be here." And then the lights embedded in the wall started shutting off one row at a time, plunging the chamber into deeper and deeper black until only a single drawer remained glowing faintly across from us on the opposite wall, its amber light pulsing irregularly, almost breathing. And Dr. Gray's entire body went rigid when he saw the ID etched into the side of that drawer, his voice cracking as he whispered, "That's you." I couldn't breathe, frozen on the maintenance gantry as the faint amber light from the single glowing drawer painted the steel in ghostly orange, and Dr. Gray's trembling finger kept pointing at the etched code on its surface. My name, my date of birth, even the hospital where I was delivered carved into the plate like someone had planned this decades before I'd ever existed. And the realization hit so hard my knees buckled, Tommy catching my arm as the deep vibrations below us grew louder, each one shaking the entire alpha lattice until dust rained from the metal struts above, and the voices in my skull came back, deafening this time, no longer whispers but a tidal surge. Thousands of them overlapping, calling my name in perfect unison like a congregation chanting before a sacrifice, and I screamed just to drown them out, clutching my head so hard my nails dug into my scalp. But it didn't stop, couldn't stop, because they weren't talking to me. They were talking through me, using me as some kind of relay, and the pulsing drawer across from us clicked loudly, once, twice, 3 times before sliding open by itself with a low hiss of escaping gas, revealing not a corpse like the others but a cocoon of translucent membrane inside which something was moving, twitching in slow, unnatural rhythms. And Dr. Gray gasped, stepping forward with horror and awe tangled in his voice. "It's the bridge organism. It's keyed to you. They made you its template." But before I could respond, the thing inside the membrane convulsed violently, tearing through the sheath with a wet ripping sound that made my stomach flip. And what emerged wasn't human, wasn't animal, wasn't anything my brain could parse. Its surface smooth and slick like mercury but shifting constantly, forming features only to melt them away again. And then, horrifyingly, for a fraction of a second, its face became mine. Eyes, mouth, nose, everything, before dissolving back into amorphous fluid, and I stumbled backwards so hard I slammed into the steel railing, my breath ripping out of me in a broken gasp, while Tommy whispered, "What the fuck is that, man? What the fuck is that?" But the thing didn't look at him. Didn't look at Dr. Gray, it focused on me and began moving, not walking, flowing forward across the grated platform in utter silence, the metal beneath it sizzling faintly wherever it touched. An instinct took over. I grabbed Tommy and shoved him behind me, raising the useless branch I still clung to like a weapon. But Dr. Gray screamed, "Don't fight it, Elliot. It's not here to kill you, it's here to merge." And the words cut straight through me, freezing me in place. And then I felt it, like gravity shifting around me, an invisible pressure pulling on my chest, on my bones, on my thoughts, dragging me toward it as the lattice below us thundered, every single chamber bursting open one by one in a chain reaction, liquid spilling from the walls as thousands of preserved bodies dropped limply into the abyss, only to twitch, jerk, and rise mid-air, their eyes lighting with the same amber glow. And I realized with bone-deep certainty that we weren't in a morgue at all. This wasn't about storage. This was an ark, and Alpha Lattice wasn't just waking them, it was assembling them, pulling the consciousnesses from the archive into these reconstructed vessels. And somewhere deep inside, I understood I was the switch, the catalyst, the reason the entire system had been waiting in silence for decades. And I screamed at Dr. Gray, "Shut it down!" But he just laughed, broken and bitter, tears streaking his face as he yelled over the rising roar, "Don't you get it? There is no shutting it down. You are the shutdown protocol. They wrote you into it before you were born. You're not here by chance, you were delivered to them." And that's when the massive footsteps from below reached the platform, shaking it so violently Tommy lost his grip and I had to slam him against the railing to keep him from falling. And out of the blackness beneath us came the thing I'd only heard before. The impossible weight, the deep dragging sound, now revealed as something so vast I couldn't comprehend its full shape. Glimpses of wet bone and exposed tendon, the size of trucks shifting beneath stretched, translucent skin that pulsed faintly with embedded veins of amber light. And somewhere inside that mass, dozens of human faces pressed against the membrane, screaming silently as it climbed the lattice walls like a parasite emerging from its host. Its head, or what resembled one, turning slowly toward us with hundreds of blinking orange eyes. And then every voice in my skull screamed at once. One single command so sharp it felt like my neurons were burning alive. "Initiate merge." My body moved without my permission, stepping forward as if pulled on strings. The thing from the drawer extending a tendril of shimmering liquid that reached toward my chest, and Dr. Gray tried to intervene, screaming my name, grabbing my arm. But the instant his skin touched mine, the tendril lashed into him instead, and he froze, mouth open in a soundless scream, his body convulsing violently before collapsing, empty, like his mind had been stripped from him entirely. And I realized that if it touched me, there wouldn't be any Elliot anymore. No thought, no choice. Just an extension of whatever this lattice had been building for centuries, and Tommy, sobbing, shoved something heavy into my hand, the black cylinder we'd stolen from the sealed drawer earlier, the one Dr. Gray had used the injector on. And for the first time since entering this place, instinct didn't hesitate. My fingers twisting the final lock open and pressing the trigger just as the tendril reached my heart, and the cylinder erupted, releasing a piercing wave of white light so violent it shredded the darkness. Collapsing drawers, liquefying steel, obliterating the membrane organism in front of me in a shrieking burst of vapor. But it also tore straight through the platform beneath us, sending everything plunging into the void. And for a fraction of a second as we fell, weightless, I thought I heard the voices recede, softer now, like something dormant slipping back into sleep, whispering one last message: Sequence 0 incomplete, pending retrieval. And then everything went black.